and he was completely like eating like very little a day, like completely skinny, and he was basically doing all these austerities to get self-realization. And then so when he got to the temple, and when he came to the temple, he fit right into his spirituality, and he's been practicing for about Krishna consciousness seriously for about a year and a half now. So he'll be speaking tonight. So the schedule is he'll be speaking till about 8:05, and then we'll have a little question and answer discussion with everybody, and then we'll have a little bit more kirtan, and then we have a feast for everybody. So let's give a big round of applause for Ryan.
Hey, exaggeration, the austerities. I was still living with my parents. Not so much austerity, like nice, comfortable situation, but.
He's still eating very little.
No. That's definitely not true. You can't survive in a Hare Krishna temple eating very little. People will force you to eat very, very much. You'll experience also. If you guys want, it could probably all come much closer instead of being all spread out. You know, it's kind of.
Yeah, he's vegetarian.
A big room. Yeah. I'm not gonna invite anybody or anything. Yeah, everyone wants to come in. It's nice because I recognize a lot of you. Some people I've met. I know Krishna and Zach. I just met you the other night, so it's nice that you came and we can discuss these things together. And a lot of you guys are, I've not met before, but hopefully we can kind of get to know each other and have a nice discussion. When we do this process of speaking about spiritual topics together, when everybody comes together and we all speak about spiritual topics and someone takes the role of the speaker, it might almost seem like someone is taking a position of authority. Like I'm going to now tell you, like, think of the pastor of the church. I am now going to tell you, like what to believe, what is truth, and you have to accept it. But that's not exactly the mood of how we speak in Krishna consciousness circles or how we speak in a temple like this and within our own society. Actually, it's said that when someone speaks a Bhagavatam or speaks a spiritual topic, the person who speaks actually gets purification. The person who speaks gets the purification. And also the people that listen get the purification, because a spiritual person is of two varieties. If we should wonder, like, what is a spiritual person? Like, what is someone who's spiritual? I mean, the word spirit itself, it comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means breathing. It means breath. So breath is like the essence of the body. The essence of our life is our breath. And so someone who is spiritual is looking for the essence. I mean, maybe you also know, like alcohol, when you distill it very much, it's called spirits. It's called spirits, right? Wine and spirits. So, and it raises your spirits. It's said to raise your spirits, although ultimately temporarily raise your spirits. So spirits, alcohol is the most defined, the most refined form of the drink of alcohol is called a spirit. So similarly, a spiritual person is also someone who is looking to refine the understanding of their own identity, want to refine the understanding of their own identity. And because everybody is in this world is kind of trying to understand what is their identity. That's the situation of this world. Everybody's looking in some way in their own minds to identify themselves. What is my role in society? What is my role in relationship with other people? Am I a happy person, a sad person, a good person, an evil person, a talented person, a successful person? So there are many different identifications that we're striving for in our life. But a spiritual person is someone who's looking for the essence, what is actually the real essence of ourselves. Instead of trying to identify with superficial things, we want to find out, who am I really? Who am I really? And so myself personally, I've dedicated this life to understanding what is the essence of life. Dedicated this life to understanding what is the essence of life, or what is the essence of being. Instead of just taking part in so many activities and getting caught up in so many roles like an actor, a spiritual person wants to say, who am I actually? So this is a process of refining. It's almost like a mirror. It said Chetu Darpana Marjanam, that the mind, the soul is like a mirror. And there's a process that we go on, the spiritual process is of distilling that essence of who we are. So like I said, there are two kinds of spiritual people. There are people who are still getting refined, and then there are people who are refined. And we call the person who is fully refined as a self-realized person, because they are always, all the time, all day, they are fully refined. They understand who they are, and they're acting from a place of complete authenticity. They're acting from a complete place of realization about who they really are, their real spiritual nature, their real identity. Whereas a person who's still in the refining process is also a spiritual person. Everyone who came here tonight, you're all spiritual people. You're all spiritual people because you're interested in some way in refining yourself, getting better, becoming better than what you are now, and becoming a more authentic version of what you are now. So all of you are all spiritual people, and actually everybody is a spiritual person because everybody is a spiritual soul. The question is whether people are interested in knowing that they're a spiritual soul or not. So for myself, I can say that I'm also in this refining process. Like I'm very new spiritualist. You know, there are people who are much more experienced than me, much more senior to me. And you could hear someone talk who has that realization, they'll speak from that realization. But the role of speaking, why I would speak to you even though I'm not self-realized, I'm not a self-realized person. But because I'm striving for self-realization, I take on the role of speaking to others, and it helps me to, it will help me to actually, to express my own desire to achieve the essence of life as authentic compassion. And I'll talk tonight about what authentic compassion is and why it's the goal of life. Authentic compassion, why it's the goal of life. And by doing that, I hope that I can also increase my own desire to have it, and my own ability to live it out. So that's kind of my purpose in speaking. So that's like an introduction for the topic of authentic compassion, how we can understand authentic compassion is the goal of life. So to start the topic, we can first ask about what compassion actually is. How do we define compassion? And I thought we could ask it as a question, you know, if you could think of someone who is compassionate, what are the qualities that a compassionate person possesses? What are some of the attributes? Maybe we could go around and just a few people can share like their ideas, their thoughts. Since this is a discussion, you know, it's a discussion, so you can share your thoughts about your impressions. What is a compassionate person like? Who has any thoughts?
Someone that's able to put themselves in someone else's shoes, so understanding.
Okay, someone who can, in their mind, they can put themselves in somebody else's shoes, they can understand their position. Okay.
Someone who's kind.
Someone who's kind, compassion, kindness. Okay. Ash.
Someone who can offer that kindness and put him or herself in somebody else's shoes and assist, help, give, offer with no attachments whatsoever to that outcome of the giving.
So there you go. So he said that you project yourself in somebody else's shoes, and he said you have something active has to be there. You have to give something. Okay.
Being able to give somebody your complete attention and listen fully.
Nice. Giving someone your complete attention, that's also compassion. Okay. Any one last reflection?
When you combine your passion in the right direction with the compass, it becomes compassion.
Nice. Thank you so much. There's someone who says that. He says like, we have passion, so if we, like a compass, if we align our passion and put it in the right direction, then it becomes compassion. So that's a nice point. It becomes compassion. So actually, I also appreciate Ash's point, kind of gives a nice introduction to this. If we look at the definition of what does the word compassion mean in English language, the definition according to Merriam-Webster is sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with the desire to alleviate it. So there's two aspects of compassion. You know, compassion is both sympathy or empathy. We hear the word sympathy or empathy a lot, but also active thing. So one of the first thing is awareness or cognizance. There has to be awareness or cognizance of the situation, because if you're not aware of other people's feelings, there's no chance of being compassionate towards them, right? If you're not able to tune into what other people want or other people need. So the first thing you have to be aware, you have to be sensitive, you have to be able to project yourself into others' positions, sympathy or empathy, they call it, feeling what other people are feeling. But then the other aspect of compassion is that compassion is an active thing. Sympathy and feeling is only the first step. But actually, if someone really wants to be compassionate, then they actually have to make an arrangement to improve the situation. So we can understand that when one is able to adjust situation, then they're able to actually give compassion. So not just thinking or feeling something for somebody, but actually some active attempt is made. So we can understand that it's extremely hard to have compassion. It's actually impossible to have compassion if we don't have any facility or power to actually create a change in other people's lives. If we don't have a facility for transformation, then it's not possible to be compassionate. Only possible to feel emotion for other people or to feel something. So we can say that compassion usually comes when we look at the needs of others, right? That's when compassion usually arises. But if there's no facility, then there can't really be authentic compassion. If there's no facility to actually make a transformation, actually if you want to make a transformation in the world, or make a transformation even in somebody else, but you want to give them something, then you have to be very mindful, you have to be very reflective, you have to be strategic, and then you can actually be compassionate, you can enact something on somebody's lives. If you want to bring greater well-being or greater facility. So we can understand that's like a preliminary thing to understand about compassion, is that if we cannot do something to make a difference, then it can't be authentic compassion. So some facility has to be there. And then the next point is that if facility has to be there, then we can understand that if we want to have compassion for others, then the first person we should have compassion for is ourselves. We have to have compassion for ourselves. And so what does that mean to have compassion for ourselves? It means, and oftentimes we actually hear in our society that we should have compassion for ourselves. But when people say that nowadays, actually, people tend to mean is like, that we should feel sorry for ourselves, or we should feel, that we should feel like, we should feel like whatever we do is okay. That's kind of like what it kind of translates into. Hey, you can't follow, you set your mind to something, you can't do it, that's okay, don't worry about it. Just be compassionate towards yourself. But being compassionate towards yourself doesn't mean excusing yourself or giving yourself an excuse not to grow. But being compassionate to yourself means actually having the facility to grow. Having the facility to transform your own life is what it means to have self-compassion. Because if you don't have a facility to change your own life, then there's no question of having a facility to change other people's lives or to have any kind of compassion towards others. So we can first understand that if there's no power of transformation for ourselves, then there's no compassion. So without involvement, we could call it as just sympathy. You can care about someone, it's very good to care, but it's sentimentalism. It's a good place to start, but we can't call it authentic compassion. So maybe another thing to think about is just some other definitions of compassion according to the Sanskrit dictionary. Of course, we're students of the Vedic literature of ancient India, so we're studying the tradition of ancient India. And so in ancient India is the oldest language in the world, Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit we get some words that actually give some more clarity on breaking up compassion. What are some different varieties of compassion? Like anukampa, sympathy is a word. It describes a type of compassion as sympathy. Or anugraha, which we described. Someone said kindness, being gracious, or you can favor, confer benefit on others. This is called anugraha. It's like a generosity kind of. There's karuna. Karuna, it's often said that people who are devotees, people who are spiritual people, they're titikshava karunaya, said in the Bhagavatam, that these people are kind and tolerant and merciful by nature. That a spiritual person is very kind and merciful. So that kind of mercy, that soft kind of mercy is called karuna. Also called kripa. Kripa means compassion, but is accompanied by gentleness or kindness or pity, and is usually shown to somebody who you know. You have kripa comes through a relationship. When you have a relationship, then there's kripa. There's specifically compassion within a relationship towards somebody that you know. And then doya. Doya is a word that often we hear. I don't know if any of you were here for last week. Last weekend was a big festival that we have. It's a big festival in India called Gora Purnima. So Gora Purnima means Gora Purnima celebrates the appearance of a great saint named Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is described as Doyalu. He was merciful, but he was not just merciful to one person, but his mercy was very broad-minded. His mercy was spread over the whole world. So Doyalu describes someone who is merciful towards everybody. he wants to uplift everybody. He has a very broad vision, and we can think that usually saintly people are very saintly people. They have that quality of doilu. It's almost parental in nature. They want to take other people like their children, like Christ was saying like that, for example. That God is a father and we're all his children, and so he had that mood of compassion and doilu. So that's some good superficial understanding, at least, of what compassion is and like the definition of compassion. But we also can understand that there are two different kinds of compassion. There's spiritual compassion and there's material compassion, humanitarianism, what we call humanitarianism. So this is important to understand because so far we've said in this talk, or I'm basically saying that according to the Vedas, the goal of our life, the goal of human life is to get authentic compassion. So why is it important to get authentic compassion? And why is that a spiritual goal, to have authentic compassion? Because oftentimes we see that there are many people who are looking out for the well-being of people on a wide scale, feeding people, clothing people, giving them a place to stay. This is very good. And humanitarianism, as a general trend in society, is hoping to do that. Open hospitals, help people in different ways that are in different distress conditions. But we don't necessarily say that humanitarians are spiritual people. In fact, sometimes humanitarians are atheistic people. Many times it happens that they have no belief in any higher power, no belief in God, no even really belief in the higher nature of the spirit, but they just feel that the point of life is to be a good person. Like I talk a lot, I go on the street, I distribute like books on the street. I hand books at people, spiritual books, and I try to convince them to give me a donation for a spiritual book. And this is actually not anything new, but this is an old tradition that goes back thousands of years in India. As one of the duties of spiritual people, they should go out and try to convince other people to become spiritual. It's compassion. And so one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people will say, no, I don't need these books. In life, we just have to try to become good people. We just have to be good people. That's good enough. If we just try to help other people, help the people around us, then we'll be happy and then we'll be okay. So that's as far as their vision goes. But actually understand that spiritual compassion is a little different than humanitarianism. Anyone want to say what they think the difference is between spiritual compassion and material compassion and humanitarianism? Any thoughts? What do you think, Colin?
The difference between spiritual compassion and material compassion. I would say material compassion is more superficial compassion in terms of your well-being, whereas spiritual compassion could be, even if it's maybe challenging materially, in the end it turns into the greatest form of love.
So sometimes spiritual compassion doesn't even make sense materially, but is actually a higher form of love. Okay, very nice answer. What do you think, Tosi?
I think that to help materially is very nice, but maybe it won't last a long time.
Yeah.
Like for example, I can buy some sandwich to someone or whatever, drink, and he may feel temporarily some relief and happiness, but how long it will last? After a few hours he'll be again hungry.
Exactly. They say, for example, that if you give a man a fish, you can feed him for a day. Of course, we wouldn't say that. But they say that. But if you teach a man how to fish, you can feed him for his whole life. So not that we're going to advocate that, but it's true that if you give someone empowerment, that's actually better than just giving them temporary relief to their suffering. And so actually, like Tosi is saying, a humanitarian, they might go out and spend their whole life trying to help people, but the help they can give them is only temporary. You might temporarily remove a little suffering they're experiencing. You might remove some interference in their life. But the state of suffering isn't removed. The state of suffering remains in their life. Because suffering is an eventuality. It's inevitability. Just because you feed someone one day doesn't mean they won't be hungry the next day. I'm sure we've all had that experience. Even sometimes you eat a very, very big meal and you think, that was such a big meal, I'm never going to have to eat again in my life. But the next day, you're still hungry again. Go back in the fridge looking for something. So similarly, the suffering continues. Suffering always coming. A spiritual person is more interested, or spiritual compassion is more interested in how do we actually nourish people on a deeper level? How do we actually nourish people on a level that goes beyond the mind, beyond the intelligence, beyond the body, beyond the senses? That's actually the question of spiritual life. Because if you give someone that kind of nourishment, then the idea is no matter what their external situation is, even if they seem to be in a great situation of depravity, maybe they can still be happy. And so our spiritual master Srila Prabhupada, he described this as blowing on the boil. There's a famous conversation he had, and Srila Prabhupada is a very great saintly person. His words are a little strong, but we'll hear them. I'll just read you the conversation he had, what he said, and it was about the topic of compassion. And in this situation, you give the example of a boil. If anyone ever had a boil before, especially if you go to India, there's like very hot there. You can get boils on their skin, and they're very painful. And so he gives this example of if I have a boil on my skin, and you want to help the situation by blowing on the boil, how much is that going to actually help? It's not going to really help the situation. And so about compassion, Prabhupada says, so first you have to understand that you have to die. If I think that you shall not die, so this compassion, how will it help? You have to die. So then what is the use of this compassion? If you give him something and he will die, is that real compassion? Suppose there's a boil and I am suffering, and you come. You say, oh, you are suffering. Is that compassion? Say, no, you must, maybe you feel something. He's saying, maybe you feel, you're suffering. He says, you may feel something for me, but what is the meaning of that if you cannot do anything for me? So that kind of compassion is useless and wasted. That kind of compassion is wasted. So actually, to Tulsi's point, similarly, if we're looking at actually how do we help people? Because one universal fact is that any person, if you ask them, how to be happy, they can tell you that you should try to help others. You should try to get out of yourself a little bit. You'll become happy by helping others. So how do we actually help people? Is we have to help them by helping them to understand their spiritual identity, understand who they are in a way that isn't temporary. It's not a temporary fix, but it's a permanent fix. Give them something that will actually that actually sustain them beyond the bodily concerns. So to our earlier point, we say we have to have, if you want to have compassion, you have to have facility, right? If you want to help someone who's poor, if you're also poor, what can you do? You can't do anything for somebody. If you're also poor, you can't help someone to become rich. So similarly, what is the kind of compassion that what is the kind of facility that spiritual compassion requires? The kind of facility that spiritual compassion requires is that one has to be happy. One has to actually be happy themselves in order to give to others. If one isn't happy themselves, if one hasn't realized spiritual happiness, then there's little chance of being able to give spiritual happiness to other people, which is actually the highest thing you can give them, is spiritual happiness. So you won't be able to give them spiritual happiness unless you've realized spiritual happiness. So this is actually the only way we can help people, is by giving them that. So what is actually real happiness? And is real happiness dependent on material facilities? That's the question. Is real happiness simply dependent on material facilities, or is it dependent on something else? Is it dependent on relationships? That's what I ask. Is real happiness really dependent on material things? Like an interesting study that I saw that was done, an interesting survey was done on some of the places where there are communities in the world where people are the happiest places in the world. And the places like where people are most happy in the world, some communities in the world, they found the Amish community, for example, was actually really happy. The Amish community, everyone know what Amish people are? It's the Amish community. And they also found like people in West Bengal, they're very simple people living very simple lives, like traditional Indian culture, the Vedic culture. They're living very simple lives. And they found that these are some of the happiest communities in the world. And why is that these people are very happy? Is it because they have so many material things? They have so many material facilities? No, they don't. And the Amish, they actually have renounced, they've given up most of the material facilities that people are after nowadays, or that people are looking for happiness. They've given it all up. When people live in India, sometimes even the Westerners come, they see there's a situation of depravity actually that they're living in. At least the Englishmen thought so when they came and they conquered India. This is a situation of depravity. They tried to they tried to impose industrialism on the Indians because of that. So there you can see they're not very material opulent. They don't have very many comforts. But what they do have is they have stability and they have community, and they have a sense of belonging to a community. That sense of belonging to community makes them much happier. Actually, the Amish have an interesting tradition that they send their children away at a certain age. They give all the Amish kids who are raised in the community, they have a chance to go out into the world. And a lot of them take it. They actually go out in the world and they can do whatever they want, you know? He's like, not to think that the Amish are just imposing on their children, you have to live this life, but they give them all a chance to leave. And actually 85%, at least 85% will come back to the communities. They can't tolerate the world. They don't want to be in the world. Because if you think about it, you know, why would you want to sacrifice a situation where you're being taken care of by community, where you know what your role is, you know what your duty is, you know what your position is relative to others. You have support in the form of family, people you've been raised with. Whereas you come in the world and it's just an endless series of questions. What am I going to do? How am I going to support myself? Who's my friend? Who's my enemy? Who's trying to exploit me? There's an endless headache. So actually, by living in these communities, people become extremely happy. And so we can see that the sense of belonging is actually is what makes them happy, the sense of belonging. And I'm sure if we all can reflect now, that there are people in our lives that we know who have many things, many facilities, material facilities, many talents, many strengths, and they're not happy. We can also reflect that maybe there's somebody that we know who has absolutely nothing, and also they're not happy. They have very little and they complain all the time. I have nothing, when am I going to get some money, when am I going to get some something in life, when am I going to make it? They're not happy. We also know people who have all their basic needs covered and they're still not happy. So this is quite like wondrous, you know, like what a question. People can have all their needs covered, they can be completely lacking, or they can be completely opulent, and they can still be unhappy. So happiness is independent. And so we can ask, you know, like when is a time in your life, you can think, when's a time in my life when I was actually feeling the most happy? Everyone think about for a second. Like a time in their life when they felt the most fulfilled, the most happy. If you can picture it, you know, try to picture it. And we can try to identify, like universally you can identify some of the common things that are usually happening at a time in your life when you're feeling the most happy. Like your golden age, you know, when's your golden age? And usually you feel that you feel good about what's happening around you. You feel good about your situation, what's happening around you. You feel good about what you're doing with other people and what you're doing to other people, you feel good about. And you feel that other people value you. You feel valued by other people. You feel other people are helping you to feel valued. Other people are looking out for you. Other people around you are actually looking out for you. They're trying to uplift you. They want you to feel happy. They want you to feel valued. And you actually feel valuable. Like you're actually contributing something to others. Not that you're just, you know, only living for yourself or just satisfying yourself. But that you're doing something to help others and to, you know, to give something back to others around you. And maybe you also feel that there's some adventure going on in your life. It has to be some adventure. There's some risk, there's some adventure. So these things we can see in our lives. Usually these are the symptoms of happiness. Actually that happiness isn't at all dependent on material facilities, but happiness is dependent on relationships. It's dependent on relationships. Like we can't get around it. Even if the richest person in the world, the best car in the world, but why does he have all these things? He wants to attract people into his life, right? So we can understand the material relationships. Actually, what brings happiness has to do more with our perception of ourselves and the perception of others that they have of us, and how we are interpreting the perception other people have of us. It's actually all perception. It's all perception about others. That's actually where happiness is coming from. Not coming from our material facilities that we may or may not have. And so I just want to share a nice verse. It's a really beautiful verse. This is from the Bhagavad Gita. And Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita is faced with a situation where he actually has to kill all his family and relatives. So talk about like a relationship rub. All these people are very dear to him. He has to kill them, and he has to fight with them in a battle. And he becomes very soft-hearted in the moment of actually fighting with his relatives. And he says, it said, Sanjaya Ubacha, Tam stata kripaya vishtam Ashupurna kolekshanam vishidantam mitam vakyam ubacha madhusudana. Sanjaya said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudan Krishna spoke the following words. And I just want to take attention to the purport here. And anyone want to read the purport? You want to read it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Material compassion, lamentation, and tears are all signs of ignorance of the real self. Compassion for the eternal soul is self-realization. The word, I don't know how to say that.
Madhusudana.
There you go. Is significant in this verse. Lord Krishna killed the demon Madhu, and now Arjuna wanted Krishna to kill the demon of misunderstanding that had overtaken him in the discharge of his duty. No one knows where compassion should be applied. Compassion for the dress of a drowning man is useless. A man fallen in the ocean of nescience cannot be saved simply by rescuing his outward dress, the gross material body. One who does not know this and laments for the outward dress is called a Sudra, or one who laments unnecessarily. Arjuna was a
Kshatriya.
Satriya, and this conduct was not expected of him. Lord Krishna, however, can dissipate the lamentation of the ignorant man, and for this purpose, the Bhagavad Gita was sung by him. This chapter instructs us in self-realization by an analytical study of the material body and the spirit soul, as explained by the Supreme Authority, Lord Sri Krishna. This realization is possible when one works without attachment to fruitive results and is situated in the fixed conception of the real self.
So that's quite a lot. We don't have to digest all of that. In fact, when I read this purport, I can't digest all of that. It's like, it's one of my favorite purports of Bhagavad Gita, because it says, compassion for the eternal self is self-realization. No one knows where to direct their compassion. Like I said, he asked people, everybody wants to be compassionate. They want to have that quality. In fact, it seems like it's like the summation of all good qualities, right? Kindness, we talked about, all these different qualities, kindness, gentleness. These things all are summed up in compassion. But nobody knows where to apply their compassion. They feel it in themselves, they have compassion. I want to serve someone. I want to help someone. I want to uplift people. I want to do something outside of myself. But they don't know where to apply it. That's the problem. But it says, but Srila Prabhupada is explaining, and Krishna is saying, that if you have compassion for the eternal soul, that's actually the nature of self-realization. That is not different than self-realization. Like we were saying in the beginning that, how do we become very refined, understanding the essence of what we really are? Actually the Bhagavad Gita says the essence of what we really are is compassionate. It is compassionate. Who we really are is compassionate. And it has to be, because the eternal soul is everywhere, in everybody. I'll show you a nice picture. This is a famous picture. You can see, it's got a little blurry actually, this is not going to render very well. But there's a sage, he's meditating here, and he sees in the heart of everybody, it's a form of Krishna, Vishnu. It's described that Krishna, the God, the personality of God, is situated in everybody's heart. And so the spirit is everybody, spirit is everywhere. And so Krishna consciousness is described as seeing every living being with divine vision in relationship to God, seeing everything in relationship. Just like how we said that people in the Amish communities, they feel happy because they feel a sense of belonging, because they're in relationship properly with others around them. But actually, by nature, we're also in relationship with everybody around us and everything around us. We're already in relationship, and that relationship can be understood based on relationship with God. Because what is the definition of God? The definition of God is one who pervades everything, who's in everything. He's all powerful, he's all knowing, he has to be everywhere, because if he wasn't, he'd be quite limited. So God has to be that. So God is in everything, every single person. So what self-realization is when you see that your own spiritual nature is reflected everywhere around you. You're already in relationship with everything around you. You're already, and if you orient your life towards self-realization, then you're actually in the best possible relationship already. You actually can find that sense of belonging is already your nature, is that sense of belonging. Because we have an eternal relationship with the higher nature of ourselves and with God. This is the essence of the teachings of the Vedas. that compassion, that's actually the definition of compassion. It's that vision to see in everybody, your same nature. So we can give some practical explanation of this. I don't know if I'm going to read all this. We're actually just about out of time. But this is just something that Srila Prabhupada is saying about if you want to save somebody who's drowning, and he was mentioning this, right? That if someone is drowning, if you want to save a drowning man, you just rescue his jacket and just take his coat. How can I help him? Similarly, if you can't swim, you also can't help him. So spiritual life is a twofold process. And specifically what we do in Krishna consciousness is a twofold process. And he says here, both things can go. He says, a man is drowning. If you're strong enough, you can save him. But if you also become drowned, then how can you save him? So everything is there. Save yourself and then save others. This is our Krishna conscious movement. First of all, save yourself and then try to save others. Both things can go on simultaneously. The same example, if you want to remain, the same example, I skipped a line. The same example, if you want to save someone's drowning, you must know that I must not be washed away, I have to remain strong. Then I can save him. So everyone is presenting himself as the savior. These politicians, these philanthropists, humanitarians, they've taken the slogan to serve humanity. But what is that slogan? It is to serve God. Service to man is service to God. Prabhupada said, he cannot save himself, he is serving man. Our mission is very great. People have not understood it yet. So what this movement actually means is twofold process. And actually this process goes on simultaneously. But if we understand that the highest goal of life is compassion, and we want that compassion, we first understand that we don't necessarily have the compassion now, because we don't have the facility now. We don't have the facility. We don't have realization of God. We don't have proper realization. But if we can get that facility, we can realize the highest goal of life is to also uplift other people. It's the descending process. It's described that Krishna is by nature is very merciful. And his desire is to uplift all the living entities. His desire is to uplift everybody into a state of happiness. Just like our desire is to uplift others into a state of happiness. When we see someone who's suffering, we want to help them. So God is a supreme person. When he sees that somebody is suffering, he also wants to help them. So all of us are suffering in this material world. He wants to help all of us. He wants to help all of us. So relationship with God also simultaneously means the desire to help other people also come into relationship with God. It's not only that I desire for myself to come into relationship with God to get spiritual realization, to become happy, but I desire that also so I can help others. This experience is the completion of life. When we can be in that state, finally where we're desiring that for others and also experiencing it for ourselves, this is the definition of self-realization. It's what Krishna is saying. It's the definition of self-realization. So this is kind of obviously that's a very deep topic, a very abstract topic. I can share a few things that are more practical. How are we actually going to do it? So one thing that was mentioned is in our daily life, this is a practice that one of the reasons I want to give this talk is because I want to also continue to increase this practice in my own life. And it's a really nice practice of trying to be in glorification of others, trying to devote yourself to encouraging others, glorifying others, and complimenting, serving more. If you try to keep that as your meditation, keep a service attitude in your life, and try to think, how can I make other people satisfied, other people pleased? Then it actually completely cuts thinking about yourself. You can forget about yourself actually in such a state. Thinking about other people, how to alleviate their anxieties, their problems. And obviously this can start on the bodily platform because we are on the bodily platform. We're not only spirit interacting with spirit. So we can help the body. It's not that spiritual life means we should ignore the body. We help the body. But then we can also try to help the spirit. We can also try to help people in more subtle ways. Spiritual life means that we realize that we can help other people help their bodies. That's there. You have to help people's bodies because we're in the material world. We have bodies. We can't neglect that, But we should also try to look at how we can help people in more subtle ways. And by doing this practice of trying to serve people, you gradually start to get the desire to serve people in deeper and deeper ways. You want to actually give people happiness. You want to actually uplift people to a standard of peace in their life. And also by wanting to uplift people to a higher peace in your life, you're also wanting to uplift yourself because you were reflected in other people. So you're also wanting to uplift yourself to a higher level of happiness. So you should always try to serve people in a way that's more than expected. If someone asks something of you, try to go above and beyond. Try to give people the time of day. Actually, someone said that compassion was attention. Zach, you said giving people your attention. That's actually a wonderful point. If you give people your attention in your daily life, it's an amazing experience. Just when someone wants to speak to you or someone wants to ask something of you, give them your full attention. And practically speaking, people will feel so respected. They'll feel so honored, and they'll feel like you really care. And actually, if you really do care, and you can, even if you don't care, you can give them the attention, then you will start to care. Start to care about other people and their situation. And we can understand that it's not mundane, but actually if we have a spiritual vision, a spiritual intention, then by caring for other people, we're also caring for God. We can care for that we have compassion for their soul, have compassion for God who's within them. So that act of serving others can become a transcendental activity. It can become a spiritually uplifting activity, especially when we put our intention towards getting that spiritual vision. If our intention is spiritual vision and then we serve others with that intention, then it's not humanitarianism. It's fully spiritual. Because our intention is spiritual, is to see them as spiritual entities and to serve them as if they were representatives of God. To serve them as if they were. Start to become extremely joyful, and by the end of it, you're guaranteed, you're assured to attain the goal. You're assured that the scriptures assure that you can attain the goal of self-realization, of getting that compassion in your own life. So that's all I wanted to speak. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But thank you very much for your attention, your kind attention and listening. And I hope I could say something that was useful.
Anyone have any comments or reflections or questions or anything?
I don't know if it's maybe a little off topic, on topic, but when I read the Bhagavad Gita as it is, it was difficult to read it. I had to put it down because it would turn me off. And then I was at a person's house and they had this Bhagavad Gita, and I think it said Java. It wasn't As It Is. As It Is written by Prabhupada, and the other one, that other one, somehow I wanted to read it. It held I felt more compassion with that one. The other one I felt a little cold with As It Is. I felt I don't want it. But the other one, that wasn't, I don't know if it was by Prabhupada, but it was a different book, but it was Bhagavad Gita. Like one of them, I couldn't like go through with it, and yet this one I could. I don't know if they're written by the same person or they're the same book, and I looked for it and I don't see it. The one that doesn't say As It Is.
So what's the question?
Do you know where I can find it?
Where I can find it?
Because, or why I would feel compassion towards one. I would bond with it, and with the other one I couldn't. I don't understand.
Yeah.
The other one I felt As It Is was like more cold, less compassionate.
You felt it was less compassionate?
Yeah, like it was more like it's this way or the highway. Well, whereas the other one I felt like it's okay. You know,
Blowing on the boil.
work with you. Work with you.
I mean, I've read a number of different varieties of Bhagavad Gita. I used to read the Gita a lot, and I used to take a Gita with me everywhere I went. Penguin's Classic Gita. And I would sit down and I would spend like a long time reading the Gita. And all these very, nice poetic things, like, wow. And I said, wow, it's amazing, but I don't know what it means, I had no idea. I'm like, yeah, how to work without attachment. It's very profound. But I couldn't actually figure out how to apply it in my life. I really couldn't figure out how to apply it in my life. Because it's a very deep topic, it almost seems like there's something there, but I couldn't really get to the bottom of it. It would slip through my fingers when I tried to apply it. So Bhagavad Gita, it's a spiritual book. It's a very esoteric book, and it talks about very deep truths of life. And if you just read the Bhagavad Gita, especially, who's actually translating these Gitas? So many of these Gitas are being translated by Western scholars who are looking at the Sanskrit and making some, interpretation. And actually, even we heard from a Harvard professor who came here, a Harvard professor, and he said that his experience being in the academic community, when people translate, he actually translated his own Bhagavad Gita. He's a devotee. He said, in my experience of translating Bhagavad Gita, I see that most scholars who translate the Bhagavad Gita, nowadays, they don't even read so much the Sanskrit, but they just read other Gitas and they make their own poetic interpretation. They take the Gita and they make some poetic art out of it. They make it into an artwork of poetry. And they try to preserve the meter, or they try to do something like that. But they have no understanding about what it actually means. Like, the art is superficial in some ways. Like, some people can sing the Bhagavad Gita really beautifully. It's a song, song of God. Some people can sing it very beautifully. Some people can't sing it very beautifully. But the question is the content, because the Gita is meant to help free us from anxiety, help to free us from suffering. That's the point of the Gita. It's like, we even heard about the boil, right? If you have a boil, you just blow on it, it's not really going to help. You have to cut it, actually. You have to have a surgical operation to remove it. And sometimes that's a little bit purifying, a little bit difficult. And so similarly, a lot of people want to just read the Gita and they want to read, and actually this is a general point, people in spiritual circles, they want to feel something nice, read something nice, something poetic that sounds nice, or they want to speak something that sounds nice, but there's no substance to it. There's no substance. One can hear a lot of nice things, but then practically how to apply, they'll kind of go out empty-handed. And in some ways we like this because it allows us to do whatever we want. It allows us to live kind of however we want. But the thing is that real spiritual knowledge is a little bit cutting. It's a little bit cutting because real spiritual knowledge means that if we really want to make spiritual advancement, oftentimes we have to sacrifice something, right? Because we're trying to get rid of the tendencies in ourselves that are preventing us from realizing ourselves, preventing us from being good, from being compassionate. So by getting rid of, naturally a cutting process has to be there. There has to be a process of purification, of letting go of some things. And sometimes we don't like to let go of things. Humans by nature, we're very loss averse. It's been studied that we don't like to let go of things. We're very loss averse. And so when we have something, we don't want to let go of it. Whether it's ideas and notions about the world, our own way of seeing the world, we don't want to let go of that. And actually, that's why spiritual knowledge works. Because the reason because spiritual knowledge says that if we want to get understanding about the world, we have to let go. Actually, the first thing we have to let go of is our notion that we can understand everything by ourselves and that our own way of seeing the world is already okay. And we understand our own way of seeing the world isn't already okay because we're suffering something. So if we're suffering, then we have to understand we need to go to a doctor. We need to go to someone who can help us. Like if we're tied up, for example, if you want to get untied, you have to go to someone else who can untie you. You can't untie yourself if you're tied up. Your arms are tied up. So similarly, we're tied up. We need to go to an authority. And whether you have faith in that authority, the faith has to be built. It's true, So maybe you haven't built, you haven't seen you haven't gotten faith in the Bhagavad Gita yet, because you haven't seen it demonstrated yet. But I would say, practically speaking, when people come in and they see devotees, they often get some faith because they see the devotees are really living out the teachings of Gita, and they'll see the result that the people who are following these books are actually very happy. It's working in their lives. I've met many people who've dedicated their whole life to studying the Bhagavad Gita and to studying spirituality and Krishna consciousness, and they're extremely amazing people. Amazing people. So that's the evidence. If you can see, maybe if you can meet some more of those people and have the chance, then you can get more faith that even if what I read, even if it doesn't always make sense to me, or if it seems a little cutting, or it seems a little severe, or if it's not my perception of the world, not what I like to hear, still I'll be willing to try it. I'll still be willing to go through with it because I understand the result is there. I can see it in the lives of people who are following. Is that a good answer?
I hear you, and I agree. Some of it may be difficult to cut, but the other version of the Bhagavad Gita, where is it? What happened to it?
Everywhere. Trying to keep like system.
Yeah, I was just thinking that I was kind of the same way. I read a lot of different versions of Bhagavad Gita, and one thing that is very special about any kind of sacred text, but especially Bhagavad Gita, every time you read it, it's alive. So you'll get different realizations every time you read something, and it will always be ever fresh. whatever your realizations or your consciousness, whatever you need to hear, it'll come out. And I was just thinking that sometimes when you read, especially as your perspective is starting to broaden, it's when you come into contact with something new, that cold feeling is sometimes there because it's unfamiliar. But as the perspective continues to broaden, then the personality and the affection and this understanding of how it all connects, why the philosophy is important, it's holding up all these other things. So I was just thinking, something also that's interesting is that, two things, is that Prabhupada, I think that it was right after he finished translating Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the devotees asked him, what are you going to translate next? And they were excited, what are you going to give us next? And he said, I think I'll translate Bhagavad Gita. He had already translated it, but still he was thinking, I'll translate it again. And he also gave that instruction to his disciples, keep translating Bhagavad Gita, write down your realizations. And in ISKCON, you'll see like the society has 8 purposes that Prabhupada gave whenever he initiated ISKCON as a movement. And one of those purposes, I think it's 7 or 8, or 10 purposes. It's 7 or 8. It's actually it's the 10th one, to establish writing and articles and to write. So how important is it to have living realizations and people who are, the important thing is not like what version of Bhagavad Gita that you read, but that person who wrote it. Do they have the realization, like Ryan was saying about being tied up? If you're tied, you need to find someone who has that realization, who's actually practicing.
Anything else? Any other question or reflection?
I wanted to share too, maybe your inner wanting to find a little bit more for Carmen and for all of us here. I don't know if you guys here do it, but I know at the Bhakti Center on Fridays after Arati at 7 p.m. there is, I think it's called the Bhakti Life. I don't know if you've been there, Krishna, but I usually, I try to go because it's basically reading, passages or cantos of the Gita. And Krishna Dai is the person that usually takes care of that session. There's always a beautiful sharing. There's always an explanation. There's questions that bring about even more explanations and sharing of what the Bhagavad Gita is. The reason why I go there is because I know very little of the Bhagavad Gita, and for me it's digestible to go there and have that beautiful group dynamic and that sharing. I take it all in, and sometimes I have to go back and oh my God, what did they speak about in 3 weeks ago? But there's always gonna come back a reminder and boom, it's like an explosion of now that makes sense. So I don't know if you guys do it here in this temple, but I invite you and everybody else to look for that specific session, sit down with everybody else and absorb it in. It's gonna be way easier than probably if you just sit down and read it yourself, which I should do myself more often, but just sharing that with you guys.
We don't have in-person classes, but we do have a reading group.
Yeah, reading with others is really great, because they say that it takes 2 to study. There's a whole thing. It's on my mind. But the point is that when 2 people are together, 2 heads are better than 1. I mean, basically, there's something you don't understand. You can always ask somebody else, and just by verbalizing your question with somebody else, dialogue can begin, and you'll start to get some more insight. I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why we preach in the first place, and why we try to talk to other people about Krishna consciousness.